A story worth remembering. My dear friends, there are moments in our lives when the good Lord puts us exactly where we need to be. I learned this truth back in September of 1883 when I was young and thought 50 cents a day made me rich. This story I'm about to share isn't about heroes or villains, though it has both. It's about two women from different worlds who discovered that kindness doesn't check your bank account first. You know how we sometimes say, "There but for the grace of God go I." Well, this tale reminds us that every soul deserves dignity, whether they're wearing calico or silk. In a time when folks are quick to judge by appearances, I hope this story touches your heart the way it's touched mine all these years. Some details may disturb, but life wasn't always gentle on the prairie. Still, grace found a way. The afternoon sun hung low over Abilene that September day, painting the prairie the color of my mother's old copper kettle. I can still smell the dust and leather in Hutchins' auction house, mixed with the tobacco smoke from the farmer's pipes. Emma Hartley, Lord rest her soul, was closing up after another sparse auction. 50 cents clinked in her apron pocket, the same wage her daddy earned before consumption took him. That's when she heard it, faint as a whisper in church, carried on the wind that bent the cottonwoods along the back path. "Help! Someone! Please help!" Emma stopped dead in her tracks, her worn boots settling in the dirt like they'd grown roots. She knew that path well. It cut 20 minutes off her walk home, skirting the edge of the Reardon estate where folks like her didn't belong. The "No Trespassing Dangerous Ground" signs had been there since Mr. Charles Reardon Sr. bought the property, back when Emma was still in pigtails. The cry came again, weaker now, like someone's last prayer. Emma's fingers found the scrap of paper in her pocket, the one that had fluttered from Mrs. Victoria Reardon's silk purse that morning when the lady had examined the auction goods without buying so much as a thimble. The paper felt wrong somehow, like finding a hymnal page in a saloon in the fading light. Emma read those peculiar words again, the 15th, Marsh area, just come alone. Today was the 15th. Now, I need you to understand something about Emma Hartley. Her father raised her right, taught her that the Lord helps those who help themselves, but also that we're our brother's keeper. Still, she was nobody special, just the girl who wrote down bids and swept floors, whose best dress had been mended so many times it looked like a quilt. "Please, I can't hold on." That voice, refined as Sunday china, was failing fast. Emma looked toward town where supper fires were starting to smoke from chimneys, then toward the forbidden marsh. That's when she saw it. A single-horse buggy abandoned near the dying willows, tilted like it had been left in a powerful hurry. The horse was gone, but the traces hung loose like broken promises. Emma hitched up her skirts the same way her mother had taught her for crossing muddy streets and climbed through the fence rails. The ground grew soft under her feet, that treacherous kind of soft that had claimed the Petersons' best milk cow the previous spring. She followed the buggy tracks, noting how they veered sharp toward the worst part of the bog. No local would drive that way. Even children knew better. "Where are you?" Emma called, her voice carrying across the empty land like a funeral bell. "Here! Oh, thank the Lord! Here!" Emma pushed through marsh grass tall as a man's shoulder and stopped so sudden she nearly pitched forward into Kingdom Come. There, 20 feet from solid ground, Victoria Reardon was trapped in that hungry bog up to her waist. The elegant lady's black taffeta dress, the very one she'd worn to church last Sunday, was soaked with mud, spreading around her like spilled molasses. But it was the woman's eyes that held Emma frozen. They weren't just desperate. They were knowing. This was no accident, no elderly confusion like when old Mr. Thompson wandered into the creek that winter. "Mrs. Reardon!" Emma's voice came out as a whisper. "They pushed me," Victoria said, proper pronunciation cracking like thin ice. "My own family. Charles and Margaret, they pushed me in here to die." Emma's mind raced faster than a horse's at the county fair. The abandoned buggy, the cryptic note, the fact that Victoria Reardon, who'd lived here 5 years and knew every stone and tree, had somehow ended up in the most dangerous part of her own land. Why? The word slipped out before Emma could stop it. "The money, the inheritance, the papers I found." Victoria's voice grew weaker with each word. "They killed Charles Sr., my husband. Now they want me gone, too." The bog made a sound like satisfied digestion. Victoria sank another inch. Emma looked around wild as a spooked colt. The sun was dropping faster than autumn temperatures, and once darkness came, that bog would keep what it had taken. She thought of her father's last words. "Emmy, the Lord puts us where we're needed. Don't you ever walk away from someone's need." But she had nothing, no rope, no poles, just her own 2 hands, and whatever strength the good Lord had given her. "Hold on, Mrs. Reardon," Emma said, already pulling off her father's old wool coat, the last thing he'd given her before the sickness took him. "Just hold on. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story." The wool tore harder than Sunday bread. Emma's fingernails bent backward as she ripped the first strip from her father's coat. The sound sharp as breaking kindling. The fabric smelled of pipe tobacco and honest work Papa's smell, even 3 years after the Lord took him home. "Emma," Victoria's voice had gone flat as weak old soda water. "Leave me. You don't need to." Emma didn't answer. She ripped another strip, then another. The lining came away easier, good cotton from back when things were made to last. Her hands worked the way Papa taught her, quick and sure like sorting grain from chaff. 3 strips, 4. Her underskirt came next, practical muslin her mother had sewn before Emma was even courting age. The September air hit her bare legs above her boots, cold as creek water in April. "Someone's coming." Victoria's chin lifted toward the estate. A lantern bobbed between the willows like a firefly, still distant but moving steady. Emma's fingers fumbled with the knots, testing each join with a pull that burned her palms raw. The fabric held praise be. 7 lengths tied together made maybe 25 feet. The bog stretched 12 feet to Victoria, who'd sunk to her ribs while Emma worked. The older woman's lips had gone the color of February ski. Emma grabbed a branch from the dead cottonwood near the buggy. The wood felt soft as old bread, half rotted from prairie weather. She lay flat on her belly at the marsh edge, the cold mud soaking through her chemise quick as spilled coffee. The branch reached 8 feet, 4 feet short. The lantern grew brighter. Men's voices carried on the wind. Now she couldn't make out words, just the tone, purposeful. Emma swung the makeshift rope. It splashed down 3 feet from Victoria's reaching fingers. The bog made a sucking sound like boots in spring mud. Victoria sank to her shoulders. Emma pulled the rope back, mud coating the fabric now, making it heavy as wet washing. She swung again. Victoria lunged for it. The movement cost her. The bog pulled her down to her collarbones, but her fingers caught the muddy cotton. "Wrap it around your wrists," Emma said. "Tight as you can." Victoria's hands shook like autumn leaves as she wound the fabric. Her wedding ring, heavy gold with garnets, caught the dying light. Once, twice around her wrists. Emma braced the branch against a limestone rock and pulled. The fabric stretched taut as fiddle strings. Victoria didn't budge. The bog held her like a fist. That's when Emma saw him clearly. Charles Reardon III, 30 yards away, walking steady as a man checking fence posts, carrying his hunting shotgun. The shotgun barrel caught the last slice of sunlight like a church window. Charles Reardon walked steady as a deacon down the aisle. His good wool suit, the same one he wore to Sunday service. 25 yards. 20. Emma's grip went slick on the makeshift rope, sweat and mud mixed like paste on her palms. She hauled backward again, boot heels cutting trenches in the soft earth. Victoria twisted left, then right, the way Papa used to work a fence post loose. The bog released a belch of gas that stung Emma's eyes, rotten eggs and something worse, like the rendering plant on a hot day. "Pull harder," Victoria gasped. Her face had gone gray as wash water, the fabric rope stretched thin, threads popping like corn on the stove. Emma's back muscles burned the way they did after harvest day. She grabbed the cotton with both hands, leaned back with everything she had. Victoria rose an inch. 2 inches. The bog fought back, pulled her down again with a wet sucking sound. 20 yards. Emma could see Charles's face now clean-shaved, calm as if he was walking his property line. Not running, not worried, just walking steady, shotgun cradled comfortable in his arms. "Mr. Reardon," Emma called out, still pulling, "your mother needs help." "Stepmother," his voice carried flat across the marsh. "And you're trespassing, Miss Hartley." He stopped at the solid ground's edge, shotgun still cradled casual-like, not pointing at them, not yet. Emma's hands slipped on the rope. She caught it again, skin tearing against the rough fabric. Blood made her grip slippery as soap. Victoria had stopped twisting, her strength failing. The older woman's breathing came shallow and quick, like a bird caught in a barn. "She's dying," Emma said. "Tragic accident." As Charles shifted the shotgun to his shoulder. Elderly woman, confused, wondering where she shouldn't. Happens more often than folks think. Margaret Reardon stepped out from behind the willows then, her blue day dress clean as fresh laundry, not a hair out of place in her careful chignon. She carried a doctor's bag, the leather kind Dr. Morrison used, but newer, shinier. "Charles, there's a witness now." Margaret's voice held the same tone she used at church socials when discussing the weather. "Another accident." Charles stepped closer to Emma, 10 feet away now. "Young woman trying to be a hero, the bog takes them both." Emma's knees sank deeper in the mud. The rope jerked in her hands. Victoria had slipped another 3 inches. Only her head and shoulders showed above the surface now, like someone buried standing up. "The servants know she came here," Emma lied through her teeth. "They saw her leave. The servants were dismissed at noon." Margaret opened the doctor's bag, pulled out a small brown bottle. "Laudanum. We'll tell everyone Victoria had been taking it for her grief. Makes people confused. See things that aren't there." The limestone rock under Emma's branch shifted, grinding against smaller stones. The leverage was failing. Emma's arms shook like she had the palsy. She looked at Victoria. The older woman's eyes had closed, her grip on the rope going loose. "No." Emma drove her heels deeper into the mud, pulled with everything Papa ever gave her. The rope went tight as piano wire. Victoria's eyes snapped open, focused on Emma's face. "Let her go," Charles said. He'd moved to Emma's left now, 10 feet away. "Walk away. We'll make it worth your while. $500. 1,000, Margaret added, "for your discretion." And Papa died owing $600 to the bank. That debt still hung over Emma like storm clouds, the interest building every month like mold in the cellar. $1,000 would change everything, pay the debt, buy a little house, maybe even start her own shop. Victoria's fingers slipped on the muddy rope. She grabbed again, weaker this time, her wedding ring scraping against Emma's knuckles. "She murdered your father," Emma said to Charles, the words tumbling out desperate. "Mrs. Reardon told me." The arsenic in his evening cocoa. Charles's face didn't change, smooth as fresh butter. Father's heart gave out. De Morrison confirmed it. De Morrison, who you pay, Emma said. Her arms had gone numb from shoulder to wrist. Mrs. Reardon found the papers, the forgeries. What papers? Margaret's voice stayed sweet as honey cake. Poor Victoria. The grief has affected her mind. Making up such terrible stories. The bog gurgled like a hungry stomach. Victoria sank to her collarbone. Mud creeping up her throat like dark hands. Emma dropped flat on her belly, crawled forward until her chest hung over the bog's edge. The mud grabbed at her chemise, cold and eager. She reached out, caught Victoria's wrists directly, abandoning the failing rope. The older woman's skin felt cold as January wash water, her pulse fluttering under Emma's thumbs like a moth against glass. "The ring," Victoria whispered, voice thin as thread. "Evidence inside the ring." Charles Boot stepped on the makeshift rope behind Emma, pinning it. "Let her go, Miss Hartley." Emma's shoulders stretched past solid ground now. The bog licked at her chest through the thin chemise, cold enough to stop her breath. She locked her hands around Victoria's wrists. Victoria gripped back, her wedding ring cutting into Emma's palm, drawing blood that mixed with the mud. "She's coming up," Emma gasped, pulling with her back, her legs, everything. Victoria rose slightly, mud streaming from her dress like black water. The bog made an angry sound, wet and deep. That's when Margaret knelt beside Emma, smooth and graceful as sitting down to tea. The woman's clean hands reached past Emma's muddy ones, toward Victoria's throat, not reaching to help pull, reaching to push. No. Emma twisted, trying to block Margaret with her shoulder. The movement broke her balance. She slid forward, chest and stomach scraping across the bog's edge like cheese on a grater. The mud grabbed her, pulled her toward Victoria. Both women were sinking now, the bog claiming them together. Charles's shadow fell across them both. The shotgun barrel swung down toward Emma's head. She heard the mechanism clear as church bells, the hammer pulling back with a click like breaking a wishbone. She looked up at Charles Reardon's face, calm as Sunday morning, his finger steady on the trigger. In his eyes, she saw the truth, plain as scripture. He'd done this before. His father hadn't been the first. "Tragic," Charles said. "They were both found drowned. We tried to stop Miss Hartley, but she wouldn't listen." The shotgun barrel centered on Emma's head, 3 feet away, close enough to see the maker's mark stamped in the steel. Behind Charles, Margaret had already turned back toward the house, walking careful around the mud in her good shoes like she was avoiding puddles after rain. Victoria's grip loosened on Emma's wrists. The older woman was going under, chin touching the mud surface. Emma had one heartbeat to decide save herself or hold on. The bog pulled harder, hungry as winter. That's when Emma herded horses. Not one, several, coming fast from the direction of town. Hoofbeats drumming the hard-packed road like thunder rolling in from the west. Charles heard them too. His finger tightened on the trigger. The shotgun barrel wavered like a compass needle finding north. Charles' head turned toward the sound of horses. 3, maybe 4, riding hard enough to raise dust. The prairie wind carried it across the marsh. That familiar smell of dirt and horse sweat that meant folks in a hurry. Emma lunged backward with every ounce of strength the Lord gave her. Her hands stayed locked on Victoria's wrists. As she threw her weight against solid ground, Victoria rose 6 inches out of that hungry mud, black water streaming from her bodice like coffee through cheesecloth. Emma's chemise tore at the shoulder. She heard the cotton give way, felt the September air hit her bare skin. "Margaret," Charles's voice cracked high as a boy's. His wife had frozen halfway to the house, her blue dress standing out against the dying grass like a flag. The lead rider burst through the willows, Marshal Morrison, his tin star catching what light was left. Behind him came Jenkins and Frank, the two deputies who'd been with the marshal since before Emma could remember. And further back, she recognized Mr. Hutchins from the auction house, bouncing on his horse like a sack of potatoes, his neat shopkeeper's suit covered in trail dust. Charles swung the shotgun toward the riders, then back to Emma. The barrel shook now, not much, but enough to notice. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, cutting a line through the dust on his face. "Afternoon, Charles." Marshal Morrison dismounted smooth as butter, his hand resting natural-like on his colt. "Got a wire from Kansas City. Seems there's questions about your father's death certificate." Emma's grip slipped on Victoria's wrists. The blood from her torn palms made everything slick as axle grease. Victoria dropped 3 inches. The bog accepted her weight with a wet gulp that echoed across the marsh. Only the older woman's head and shoulders remained above the surface now, mud creeping up her neck like hands. "Help me," Emma called to the deputies. Her voice came out raw as fresh ground corn. Young Jenkins slid from his horse and ran toward them, his boots hitting the ground hard. Charles stepped into his path, shotgun rising. "Nobody moves." Charles' finger went white on the trigger. "This is family business." "Put the gun down, son." Morrison's voice stayed level as a spirit level, but his hand had closed proper on his pistol grip. Margaret started walking again, quick little steps toward the house like a mouse heading for its hole. Deputy Frank, older and steadier than Jenkins, moved to cut her off. Jenkins dodged around Charles like he was herding cattle, dropped to his knees beside Emma in the mud. His hands joined hers on Victoria's wrists, working hands, strong from years of ranch work before he took the badge. They pulled together. Victoria rose an inch, then stuck fast like a post in concrete. "The bog's got her tight," Jenkins said. Mud had splattered across his badge, dulling the brass until it looked like old pennies. Emma's muscles trembled like she'd been hauling hay all day. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision, the way they did when she stood up too fast from scrubbing floors. "We need leverage, something to brace against." Till Hutchins had dismounted, the little bantam rooster of a man was already dragging a fence rail from the boundary, the wood scraping across limestone with a sound like fingernails on slate. He jammed one end under a boulder big as a washtub, angled the rail over the bog's edge. "Rope in my saddlebag," Morrison called, not taking his eyes off Charles. "Jenkins, there's 30 feet of good hemp." Jenkins ran to Morrison's horse, came back with the rope the kind cowboys used, thick as Emma's thumb and rough enough to take skin off. His fingers worked quick, tying knots Emma recognized from the county fair contest's timber hitch around the fence rail, then a bowline around Victoria's chest under her arms, the kind of knots that held when they needed to. "When I lift the rail, you pull," Hutchins said. Sweat had soaked through his vest, showing the suspenders underneath. Emma wrapped the rope around her forearms the way Papa taught her for pulling stumps. Jenkins took position behind her, his chest against her back, hands over hers on the rope. Hutchins threw his weight down on the fence rail's far end like a child on a seesaw. The leverage lifted Victoria 4 inches. Emma and Jenkins hauled backward. The bog fought them. She could feel it through the rope. That awful suction like the mud was alive and hungry. Again, Hutchins gasped. His face had gone red as Sunday beets. They lifted, pulled. Victoria rose to her waist, black mud streaming from her skirts like molasses. Her lips had gone the color of February sky, no pink left at all. She wasn't helping any more, just dead weight in their hands. That's when Charles fired. The shotgun blast tore through the evening air loud enough to make Emma's ears ring like she'd been standing next to the church bell. Morrison's hat flew off his head, peppered with buckshot holes. The marshal's colt cleared leather faster than Emma could follow one smooth motion, like water flowing. "Next one won't be a warning," Charles said. He broke the shotgun, was already reaching for fresh shells from his vest pocket. Margaret screamed from where Deputy Frank had caught her, not fear, but rage, pure and clean as fresh snow, the kind of sound Emma had only heard once before, when the widow Patterson found her husband with the saloon girl. Margaret swung her doctor's bag at Frank's head. The brass clasps caught him across the temple with a sound like dropping a melon. Frank staggered, hand going to his head. "Pull!" And Hutchins threw himself against the fence rail hard enough to lift his feet off the ground. Emma's hands were slick with blood and mud. She couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The rope burned through her grip like a hot iron. Victoria rose another foot. Her hips cleared the surface. The bog made a sound Emma would remember till her dying day, like a boot pulling from deep mud, but bigger, echoing across the marsh like something dying. Charles snapped the shotgun closed, swung it toward them. Morrison fired. The Colt's report cracked sharp as breaking boards. Charles's shoulder jerked back like someone had yanked him with a rope. The shotgun fell from his hands, splashed into the marsh shallows. He grabbed his arm. Blood already seeping through his good wool suit, spreading dark as spilled ink. Charles, yet Margaret, broke free from the dazed deputy, ran toward her husband. Victoria's full weight came free all at once, like a cork from a bottle. Emma and Jenkins flew backward, Victoria's muddy body crashing into them. They landed in a heap on solid ground, rope tangled around all three like they'd been tied for market. Victoria's chest rose and fell in little bird breaths. Alive, Emma's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She tried to untangle the rope, but her fingers wouldn't work right, like they belonged to someone else. Blood from her torn palms had mixed with mud until she couldn't tell where the wounds were. "Evidence," Victoria whispered, her voice like paper rustling. "In the ring, inside." Emma looked at Victoria's left hand. The wedding ring with garnets was gone, lost somewhere in that hungry bog. No. Yet Victoria's muddy fingers fumbled at her collar, pulled out a chain Emma hadn't noticed, thin gold, hidden under the high neckline. A second ring hung from it, plain gold, worn thin with age. My first husband's, Charles Sr.'s father, inside the band. Jenkins helped Emma work the ring free from the chain. The band had writing inside, not words, but numbers. 3 sets of them, each from different banks. "He knew?" Victoria said. Her eyes found Charles, who sat in the grass with Margaret pressing her petticoat against his shoulder wound. "Your father knew they were stealing wrote it there, told me if anything happened." Marshal Morrison had moved closer, still covering Charles with his coat. "Mrs. Reardon, are you saying embezzlement?" Victoria's voice grew stronger, like she was testifying in church. "Charles and Margaret, 3 years, taking from the estate accounts. From the trust, Charles Sr. found out. They killed him for it." Margaret stood slow as rising dough. Mud had soaked through her skirt where she'd knelt beside Charles. Her careful hairdo had come loose, brown hair hanging limp as wet washing. She looked at the deputies, the marshal, Emma. Her face had gone smooth and empty as fresh paper. "You can't prove anything," Margaret said. "An old woman's ravings, a servant girl's lies." "The banks will have records," Morrison said. "Those account numbers will tell us everything." Margaret's hand went to her doctor's bag. Fumbling with the clasp, the brown bottle of laudanum fell out, rolled across the grass, then another bottle, and another. 6 bottles total, different sizes, different labels. Emma could read them even from where she sat. Laudanum, arsenic for rats, mercury salts, foxglove extract, poison, all of it poison. "Medicine," Margaret said, her voice steady as church organ notes. "All legal, all prescribed by Dr. Morrison. Foxglove, Marshal Morrison picked up one bottle, careful not to touch the cork. That's digitalis. Heart medicine. Too much stops the heart cold. Makes it look natural. The glass bottle caught the last light, amber liquid sloshing inside like whiskey. Emma knew that bottle. She'd seen one just like it when Papa was dying. De Morrison said it would ease his heart, but Papa refused it. Said he'd rather meet his maker clear-headed. Charles tried to stand. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage, spreading dark across Margaret's white petticoat. "You need to get a doctor," he said to Morrison. "I'm bleeding bad." "Dr. Morrison is 30 minutes away," the marshal said. "Same as he was for your father when you sent the servant for help, after you'd already waited an hour." Emma helped Victoria sit up. The older woman leaned heavy against her, both of them covered in bog mud thick as paint, shivering as the evening wind picked up. Victoria's hand found Emma's, squeezed with more strength than Emma expected from someone half drowned. "The house," Victoria whispered. "The study, bottom drawer of Charles Sr.'s desk, letters. He wrote it all down, everything they did." Morrison nodded to Jenkins. "Go. Take Frank when his head clears. Don't let anyone touch anything in that study." Frank was sitting up now, hand pressed to his temple where Margaret's bag had caught him. Blood ran down his neck, staining his collar dark as tobacco juice. "I need a doctor," Charles said again. His face had gone pale as fresh milk, the kind of pale Emma had seen on folks who didn't make it through the night. The blood kept coming, soaking into the prairie grass. Margaret knelt beside him again, opened another bottle from her bag, clear liquid this time. She poured it over his wound without warning. Charles screamed, the sound sharp and terrible across the marsh, like a rabbit in a trap. The chemical smell hit Emma's nose hard enough to make her eyes water. Carbolic acid, it would clean the wound, but the pain would be enough to make a grown man faint. There. Margaret capped the bottle with the hands steady as a seamstress. "That should hold until the doctor arrives." She stood, smoothed her ruined skirt like she was getting ready for company, and looked straight at Emma. Her eyes were flat and cold as the bottom of a well. "You should have taken the money," Margaret said. Victoria's grip tightened on Emma's hand. "She couldn't be bought. That's what you never understood, Margaret. Not everyone has a price. Everyone has a price." Margaret's voice had gone quiet, the way it got when she was calculating household accounts. "Yours was keeping your husband alive. You knew something was wrong with his cocoa that night. You could have knocked it from his hands, but you let him drink it." Victoria's breath caught like a hiccup. "He told me to. He said if I tried to stop them, they'd force it down his throat, make it violent. This way, it looked natural." "Natural?" Margaret laughed, but there was no joy in it, just the sound of something breaking. An old man's heart giving out after his evening cocoa. De Morrison signed the certificate without even examining him properly. Weak heart. He wrote natural cause. "You mean you're De Morrison?" Marshal Morrison said. "From Cedar Falls. Your cousin?" Margaret's smooth expression finally cracked, just for a heartbeat, like ice forming on a pond. "I don't know what you mean." "The other De Morrison, the one who's been visiting every month, the one who was here the night Charles Sr. died." The marshal had been listening close, Emma realized, taking it all in like evidence. "Where is he now?" "I wouldn't know." Margaret's voice had gone prim, the way it did when discussing unseemly topics at church socials. "I haven't seen him in weeks." Charles moaned from where he lay. The carbolic acid had raised blisters around the wound, angry red welts like Emma had seen on folks who'd been burned. "Margaret, tell them it was your idea." "Quiet, Charles." Margaret didn't even look at him. "You're delirious from blood loss. Tell them about the papers." The forgeries, the commitment papers for Victoria. Margaret's hand moved quick to her doctor's bag. But Morrison was quicker. He kicked it away from her reach, bottles rolling across the grass like marbles. One cracked against a rock, clear liquid seeping into the dirt, killing the grass where it touched. Commitment papers. Morrison's voice had gone hard as January ground. Victoria pulled something from inside her corset, a small leather journal, somehow still dry despite the bog. Her hand shook as she opened it, pages rustling like autumn leaves. "Charles Sr.'s journals," she said. "He gave it to me the night he died. Look at the last entry." Morrison took the journal, held it to catch the dying light. Emma could see the writing change on the last pages, getting shaky like an old man's hand. The final entry was just 3 words. "They've poisoned me." "He knew as soon as he tasted it," Victoria said. "Foxglove has a bitter taste. Too much sugar couldn't hide it, but he drank it anyway." "Why?" Emma's voice came out rough as burlap. "To protect me. If he'd refused, they would have forced it down his throat, made it violent. This way, it looked natural. An old man's heart giving out." Victoria's fingers found the hidden chain at her throat again, touching the empty space where the ring had hung. "He had 20 minutes while the poison worked, gave me the journal, told me about the account numbers in his father's ring, made me promise to be careful. But you stayed," Morrison said. 3 years. "You stayed with them? Where would I go?" Victoria's voice broke like thin ice. "I'm nobody." Just like Margaret said, a shopkeeper's daughter who married above herself. The law, the banks, the whole town, they'd believed Charles afore me. I needed proof, real proof. "The forged papers." Victoria nodded, her muddy hair falling across her face. "Last week I found them." "Deeds, transfers, a new will leaving everything to Charles and Margaret, my signature perfectly copied. And the commitment papers. They were going to have me declared insane, take control of everything legally." Marshall Morrison had been writing in his notebook, pencil scratching across paper. Now he looked up at Margaret. "Those commitment papers, who signed them?" Margaret's lips pressed together, thin as paper. "De Morrison from Cedar Falls," Victoria said. "Margaret's cousin. He'd already signed them. Dated yesterday. Said I was delusional, dangerous to myself and others. They were going to take me today. That's why the note. The meeting at the bog. Make it look like I'd wandered off in my madness, drowned myself." "But I showed up instead," Emma said. "Yes." Victoria turned to look at her, and in the older woman's eyes Emma saw gratitude deep as a well. "You showed up." Hutchins had been standing quiet, but now he stepped forward, the little man looking mad as a wet hen. "Mrs. Reardon, forgive me for asking, but why didn't you leave, take what you could, and run?" Victoria's hand went to her throat, fingers touching her collar where the chain lay hidden. This house, this land, it wasn't Charles Sr.'s originally. It belonged to his father. And before that, she pulled out a folded paper from her corset, so old the edges had gone soft as cloth. Charles Sr. had an older son, Charles Jr., from his first wife who died in childbirth. Morrison took the paper, unfolded it careful as handling glass. "This is a will. Charles Reardon, Jr., dated 1863. He died at Gettysburg," Victoria said. 3 weeks after we married. We were 18 years old, children really. He left me everything in his will, not that there was much then. Just some land and promises." Emma felt the air change, like before a thunderstorm. Everyone had gone still. Even Charles had stopped moaning. "You were married to Charles Jr. first." Morrison's voice had gone quiet. "Yes, when he died. His father, Charles Sr., was kind to me. We wrote letters, sharing our grief. 2 years later, He asked me to marry him, not for love, but for companionship, for someone who understood his loss. Victoria looked at Charles bleeding in the grass. Charles the Third isn't blood. He's Charles Sr.'s stepson from his second wife's first marriage. Adopted, given the name, but not blood. Margaret's face had gone white as fresh paper. You're lying. Check the courthouse records, Victoria said. Marriage certificate, 1863. Death certificate, 3 weeks later. We'll file the week after that. I'm not just Charles Sr.'s widow. I'm Charles Jr.'s widow, too. The only legitimate heir to the original Reardon land. That's when Emma heard it. Horses again. But different this time. Coming from the east, from the direction of Cedar Falls. Too many to count in the growing darkness. Margaret's expression changed. Smooth mask sliding back into place. She smiled, and it was the coldest thing Emma had ever seen. My cousin's here, Margaret said. De Morrison from Cedar Falls, with help. The horses came through the willows like a cavalry charge, 8 riders, maybe 10, their shapes dark against the purple sky. Emma could smell them before she could see them, proper horse sweat and leather, gun oil and something else, fear, the kind of fear that makes men ride hard through falling darkness. Marshal Morrison's hand went back to his Colt. Jenkins, get the women to safety. No. Victoria struggled to her feet, using Emma's shoulder for support. Mud cracked and fell from her ruined dress like old bark. I need to see who's coming. The lead rider pulled up sharp 20 yards away, his horse dancing sideways, spooked by the bog smell. De Morrison from Cedar Falls. Emma recognized him from the few times he'd visited, younger than their town doctor. Narrow through the shoulders like he'd been stretched on a rack. His medical bag hung from his saddle, but it was the wrong shape, too rigid, corners too sharp, like a ammunition box. Marshal Morrison. The Cedar Falls doctor touched his hat brim polite as Sunday. I heard there's been an accident. No accident, the marshal said. His voice carried flat across the marsh. Attempted murder? That's a serious accusation. De Morrison swung down from his horse, smooth as pouring cream. The other riders stayed mounted. Emma counted 9 men, all wearing deputy badges that caught the last light. Cedar Falls badges. My cousin Margaret sent word that Mrs. Reardon had suffered a breakdown, tried to drown herself. That's a lie, Emma said. The words came out before she could stop them. De Morrison's eyes found her then, took in her torn chemise, her bloody hands. The mud caked on every inch of her. Miss Hartley, isn't it the auction house girl? He pulled a notebook from his vest pocket. Pencil ready. You found Mrs. Reardon in the bog. Charles and Margaret pushed her. That's quite an accusation from someone in your position. His pencil moved across the paper quick as a sewing machine. Tell me, Miss Hartley, how much did Mrs. Reardon promise you to say that— Victoria's hand tightened on Emma's arm. Don't answer him. Mrs. Reardon? De Morrison's voice went soft as butter. You've been through a terrible ordeal. The mind can play tricks after such trauma. Why don't you come with me? I have a comfortable carriage waiting. We'll take you somewhere safe to rest. The asylum, Victoria said. You mean the asylum in Cedar Falls? A private sanatorium? Very exclusive, very discreet. Dr. Morrison reached into his medical bag, that too rigid bag that didn't move like leather should. I have the papers right here, all legal, signed yesterday. Yesterday. I was supposedly already insane, Victoria said, her voice stronger now. Already delusional, according to those papers you signed. So how could I be responsible for attempting to drown myself today? De Morrison's pencil stopped moving. Behind him, his deputies shifted in their saddles, leather creaking. The mind is complex, he said finally. Moments of clarity mixed with delusion. It's quite common in cases like yours. Cases like mine? Victoria pulled the chain from her collar, held up the empty space where the ring had been. "You mean widows with money, women who know too much." Marshal Morrison stepped between the women and the Cedar Falls group. "These ladies are under my protection." "You have no authority here." "Actually, I do." De Morrison pulled out another paper, this one with an official seal Emma could see even in the dying light. "Federal judge's order. Mrs. Victoria Reardon is to be remanded to my care for medical evaluation." "Let me see that." Marshal Morrison took the paper, held it close to read in the fading light. His jaw worked like he was chewing leather. Margaret had been quiet, but now she stood, walked toward her cousin with her chin high despite her muddy skirt. "Thank goodness you're here, cousin. That woman," she pointed at Emma, "shot Charles. He's dying." Emma's stomach dropped like a stone into water. "That's not true. Marshal Morrison shot him, and only because she was robbing the estate." Margaret continued smooth as cream. "We caught her stealing from the safe. When Charles tried to stop her, she shot him." "I don't even have a gun. You threw it in the bog after—" Margaret said. "We all saw it." The Cedar Falls deputies were dismounting now, hands resting on their pistols. One of them, a thick-necked man with tobacco stains on his vest, walked toward Charles, where he lay in the grass. "This man needs medical attention," he called out. "He's been shot." "By the marshal," Emma said. "In front of witnesses." "What witnesses?" Margaret's voice had gone sweet again. "Mr. Hutchins. He works with Miss Hartley. Deputy Jenkins, he's sweet on her, everyone knows that. Deputy Frank, he's unconscious." She gestured to Frank, who was indeed sitting with his head in his hands, blood still seeping from where she'd hit him. De Morrison from Cedar Falls moved closer to Victoria, his medical bag in one hand. "Mrs. Reardon, you're clearly distressed. Let me give you something to calm your nerves." "Don't you touch her!" Emma stepped in front of Victoria, fists clenched despite her torn palms, screaming, "Threatening a doctor now! Miss Hartley!" De Morrison's smile was thin as paper. "That's assault? Deputy Brennan, arrest her." The thick-necked deputy started toward them. Marshal Morrison's Colt cleared leather. "Nobody's arresting anyone without my say-so." The marshal said, "You're interfering with a federal order." De Morrison said, "That's a felony. Marshal, you'll lose your badge, maybe spend some time in federal prison." "Maybe." Morrison kept his Colt steady. "But these women are staying put until I verify that order. Hutchins, ride to town. Wake Judge Whitmore." "No need," De Morrison said. "We'll take them now. Sort it out later." That's when Emma noticed something. One of the Cedar Falls deputies had circled around behind them while everyone was talking. He had a rifle aimed at Marshal Morrison's back. "Marshal!" Emma shouted. Morrison spun, but Margaret moved at the same moment. She'd picked up her medical bag, the one Morrison had kicked away, and swung it hard at the marshal's gun hand. The Colt went flying, splashed into the marsh shallows. Everything happened at once then. The Cedar Falls deputies rushed forward. Jenkins tried to draw his pistol, but two men tackled him. Hutchins ran for his horse, but another deputy caught him, threw him down hard enough to knock the wind out. Emma grabbed Victoria, pulled her backward toward the bog. It was the only direction nobody was coming from. Even desperate men wouldn't follow them there. "Stop!" De Morrison from Cedar Falls had something in his hand now, pulled from that rigid medical bag, not a medical instrument. A pistol, small and silver, pointed straight at Victoria's heart. "One more step and I'll shoot." Victoria stood straight despite everything, mud-covered and exhausted, but dignity intact. "You're going to kill me anyway. At least here there are witnesses." "Kill you, no. Mrs. Reardon, you're going to live a long, comfortable life at my sanatorium, properly medicated." "Of course." unable to speak or write, but alive. Your estate will be managed by your loving family, very generous of them to pay for your care." "How much?" Victoria asked. "How much are Charles and Margaret paying you?" $20,000. De Morrison said it like discussing the weather, plus a percentage of the estate income. Quite generous, really. "The railroad money," Emma said, understanding flooding through her like cold water. "This isn't just about the inheritance. It's about the railroad contracts." De Morrison's smile widened. "Northern Pacific needs that right-of-way through Reardon land. They've been very patient, but patience has limits. With Mrs. Reardon properly cared for and Charles managing the estate, everyone benefits." "Except Mrs. Reardon," Emma said. "She'll be comfortable. I'm not a monster. Miss Hartley, the medications will keep her calm. She won't suffer. She'll be buried alive," Emma said. "Trapped in her own body." Margaret had retrieved more bottles from her bag, lining them up on a flat stone like a shopkeeper displaying wares. Laudanum for the pain, mercury salts for the nerves, chloroform for the difficult days. Very humane. Charles moaned from where he lay. The bleeding had slowed, but his face had gone gray as dishwater. "Margaret," he whispered, "please." "Quiet, dear." Margaret didn't even look at him. "Dr. Morrison will tend to you soon." "He's dying," Jenkins said from where the deputies held him. "That wound's gone septic." "Then we'd better hurry." De Morrison from Cedar Falls gestured to his men. "Take the women. Carefully, we don't want bruises. Hard to explain. Bruises." Two deputies moved toward Emma and Victoria. Emma backed up another step, felt her heels sink into soft ground. The bog was right behind them, hungry and waiting. That's when she saw it, movement in the darkness beyond the Cedar Falls men, shapes moving through the grass, quiet as smoke. More riders. But these weren't coming from Cedar Falls. They were coming from town. And leading them was Judge Whitmore himself, still in his nightshirt, riding like the devil was chasing him. Judge Whitmore's nightshirt flapped like a surrender flag as his horse pounded across the prairie. Behind him came 20 men. Emma recognized Banker Stevens, still wearing his evening vest. Reverend Paul with his collar askew, even old Mr. Henderson from the feed store, riding bareback on his plow horse. "Stand down!" Whitmore's voice boomed across the marsh. "All of you, stand down in the name of the law." The Cedar Falls deputies turned, confused, looking between their De Morrison and this half-dressed judge leading what looked like half of Abilene. Dr. Morrison's silver pistol stayed pointed at Victoria, but his hand had started to shake, just a tremor, like a leaf in a breeze. "Judge Whitmore," De Morrison said, voice still so smooth, "I have federal authority. You have horse manure." Whitmore reined up hard, his horse's hooves throwing mud. "That federal judge you cite, Judge Hammond, died 2 months ago. I was at his funeral." The paper in Marshal Morrison's hand, that official-looking federal order, suddenly seemed lighter, less real. Margaret's face went slack as wet dough. "There must be some mistake," De Morrison from Cedar Falls said. His silver pistol drooped. "The mistake was thinking we wouldn't check." Whitmore dismounted heavy, his bare feet squelching in the mud. "Stevens here ran to the telegraph office. Federal marshals are already on their way from Topeka." Charles made a sound from where he lay, not quite a laugh, more like a cough with blood in it. "Margaret," he whispered, "we're finished." "Shut up." Margaret's voice had gone sharp as broken glass. "Just shut up." The Cedar Falls deputies were backing away now, looking at each other, calculating. The thick-necked one, Brennan, dropped Jenkins and moved toward his horse. "Nobody leaves," Marshal Morrison said. He'd retrieved his Colt from the shallows, mud and water dripping from the barrel. Everyone stays put until we sort this out. That's when Dar Morrison from Cedar Falls did something Emma didn't expect. He grabbed Victoria's wrist, yanked her against him, pressed the silver pistol to her temple. "We're leaving," he said. "The lady needs medical attention. I'm taking her to my carriage. Let her go." Emma stepped forward, but the doctor pressed the pistol harder against Victoria's skull. "Back away, Miss Hartley, or I'll paint the prairie with her thoughts." Victoria's eyes found Emma's, calm, steady. The older woman mouthed one word, "Run." Then Victoria went limp dead weight in the doctor's arms. He staggered, trying to hold her up. The pistol wavered. Emma lunged forward, grabbed the doctor's wrist with both bloody hands, twisted the way Papa had taught her to handle grabby men at harvest dances. The pistol fired. The sound cracked across the marsh, sent night birds screaming from the willows. The bullet went wide, splashed into the bog somewhere behind them. Dr. Morrison shoved Victoria down, tried to bring the pistol around to Emma. She held on, fingernails digging into his wrist tendons. He was stronger, the gun inching toward her face. Then Hutchins was there, the little bantam rooster of a man, swinging a fence post like he was driving railroad spikes. The wood caught Dr. Morrison across the shoulders. He went down hard, silver pistol flying from his grip. "Run!" Marshal Morrison shouted. "Everyone to town, now." The Cedar Falls deputies scattered like roaches when you light a lamp. Some mounted their horses, rode hard for the county line. Others just ran into the darkness on foot. Even Margaret tried to run, but her muddy skirts tangled her legs. She fell face first into the grass, came up spitting dirt. Emma helped Victoria stand. "Can you ride?" "I can manage." Victoria's voice came out steady, though Emma could feel her shaking. "We need to get to safety." "The jail," Marshal Morrison said. "No." Victoria shook her head. "They'll expect that. The auction house. It has good locks, small windows." Hutchins had already caught his horse, was helping Jenkins up behind him. "I've got keys. We can barricade ourselves in." They rode hard through the darkness, Emma clinging to Marshal Morrison's back while Victoria rode with Judge Whitmore. Behind them, Emma could hear shouting, some of the Cedar Falls men regrouping maybe, or just the townsfolk trying to sort out what had happened. The auction house sat dark at the edge of town, a squat building of limestone and timber that had been a grain warehouse before Hutchins bought it. Emma knew every corner of it, the way the back door stuck, the loose board in the storage room floor where mice got in, the window that wouldn't latch proper. Hutchins unlocked the front door with shaking hands, keys jingling like dinner bells. They pushed inside, Emma and Jenkins immediately shoving a heavy oak display case against the door. "Windows," Morrison said. "Check all the windows." Emma ran to the back room where they kept the unsold lots. The windows were small, high up, barely big enough for a child to squeeze through. But she checked each latch anyway, fingers leaving bloody prints on the wood. "They won't let this go," Victoria said. She'd collapsed in a chair, mud drying on her dress in sheets that cracked when she moved. "Too much money involved, the railroad, Charles and Margaret's theft, someone will come." "Let them come," Morrison said. He'd found Hutchins' shotgun behind the counter, was loading it with steady hands. "We'll be ready." They waited. Emma's torn hands throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Victoria dozed fitfully in her chair. Jenkins kept watch at the front window while Morrison covered the back. Near midnight, Emma heard footsteps on the boardwalk outside. Slow, deliberate. Then Charles's voice, weak but clear. "I know you're in there." Emma peered through a crack in the shutters. Charles stood outside, one arm in a makeshift sling, his face pale as moonlight. Margaret stood beside him, and with them were three men Emma didn't recognize, rough-looking types. the kind you saw at the stockyards after payday. "My wife needs a doctor," Charles called out. "She's made mistakes, yes, but she doesn't deserve to die in jail. She deserves to hang," Victoria said quietly from her chair. "Open the door." Charles continued, "We'll leave, go to California. You'll never see us again." Morrison put his mouth to the door crack. "Can't do that. Charles, you murdered your father. That was Margaret's doing. I was weak. I loved her." Margaret said something sharp to him, too low to hear. Charles shook his head, kept talking. "I have money. 20,000 in cash, hidden at the house. It's yours if you let us go." "Blood money," Emma said loud enough for them to hear. Something heavy hit the door, a shoulder or a boot. The oak display case scraped an inch across the floor. "They're trying to break in," Jenkins whispered. Another hit. The doorframe cracked, splinters showing white in the dark wood. The men outside were taking turns, throwing their weight against the door in rhythm. "That door won't hold," Morrison said. He cocked the shotgun. Victoria stood, walked to Emma with dignity intact despite the mud. The exhaustion, everything. She pulled something from her corset, a small leather book Emma hadn't seen before. "Charles Sr.'s personal accounts," she whispered. "Every bribe, every payment to the railroad, every forged document, names, dates, amounts. He knew they'd eventually kill him. This was his insurance. Why didn't you?" "I was waiting for the right moment, when I had witnesses, when I had proof they couldn't deny or destroy." Victoria pressed the book into Emma's hands. "If something happens to me—" The door cracked down the middle with a sound like breaking bones. One more hit, maybe two, and they'd be through. Morrison raised the shotgun. Jenkins drew his pistol. Emma clutched the leather book against her chest, feeling the weight of all those secrets. That's when she heard it. Horses again, but this time hundreds of hoofbeats, like thunder rolling in from every direction. Charles heard it too. He stepped back from the breaking door, looking around wild-eyed. The thunder got louder, closer. Then Emma saw them through the window riders with torches, dozens of them, surrounding the auction house. The whole town had come. But riding at the front, wearing a badge that caught the torch light like a star, was someone Emma had never seen before. A federal marshal from Topeka. And behind him, in chains, rode Morrison from Cedar Falls. The federal marshal sat his horse like he was born to it, badge glinting gold in the torchlight. He was a big man, bigger than Marshal Morrison, with hands that looked like they could squeeze water from stones. Behind him, Morrison from Cedar Falls sagged in his saddle, wrists shackled with iron that caught the light every time his horse shifted. Marshal Theodore Patterson, Federal District of Kansas, the big man announced. His voice carried over the crowd like a church bell. "Everyone put your weapons down. Now." Charles stepped back from the broken door, his good hand going to his empty holster. The three rough men with him looked at each other, then at the crowd of townsfolk surrounding them, farmers with pitchforks, shopkeepers with shotguns, even Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house holding her husband's old cavalry saber. "Drop them," Patterson said again. The rough men let their pistols fall, hitting the boardwalk with dull thuds. Margaret stood between them, her muddy dress dried stiff as cardboard, chin still high like she was entering a cotillion. Emma pushed the cracked door open, helped Victoria step through. The older woman moved like every joint hurt, but her back stayed straight. She held Charles Sr.'s leather journal in one hand, that small book full of secrets. Mrs. Reardon. Patterson dismounted smooth for such a large man. "I'm here on behalf of the state attorney's office. We've been investigating Northern Pacific Railroad for 2 years. Your telegram this afternoon gave us what we needed." "What telegram?" Victoria's voice came out confused. "I didn't send any." "I did." Judge Whitmore pushed through the crowd. still in his nightshirt and barefoot, mud splattered up to his knees. Soon as I verified that federal order was forged, I wired Topeka, told them everything. Patterson pulled a notebook from his vest, thick as a hymnal. We've been tracking suspicious deaths along the railroad route. 17 landowners in 3 years. All died of natural causes, according to local death certificates. All signed over their land rights just before dying. Emma felt her stomach turn cold as January creek water. 17 people. Charles Sr. wasn't the first, wasn't even special, just another obstacle to the railroad. That's speculation, Margaret said. Her voice still held that Sunday school sweetness, even now. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can. Patterson nodded to one of his deputies, who brought forward a canvas sack. DeMorrison from Cedar Falls kept records, very detailed records. He pulled out a leather journal, similar to the one Victoria held, but newer. Every dose, every death, every payment from Northern Pacific. He even noted which poisons worked best for which symptoms. DeMorrison from Cedar Falls tried to say something through the gag in his mouth, chains clanking as he gestured wild from his horse. Your cousin wants to make a deal, Patterson said to Margaret. Full confession in exchange for life in prison instead of hanging. He's already given us names. Garrett from Northern Pacific, Brennan, the railroad's enforcer, the banker in Cedar Falls who handled the bribes. Margaret's face didn't change, smooth as fresh butter. I don't know what you're talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Victoria stepped forward, holding out Charles Sr.'s journal. Your husband. My husband wrote it all down. Every payment you and Charles took, every document you forged. Patterson took the journal, flipped through it quick. His face got harder with each page. This mentions $18,000 transferred to Charles III's private account, another $12,000 to Margaret's, all from Northern Pacific subsidiaries. Investment returns, Margaret said. Perfectly legal. For land you didn't own, Victoria said. She pulled out another paper, the marriage certificate Emma had seen earlier. I married Charles Jr. in 1862. When he died at Gettysburg, I inherited the original Reardon land. Charles Sr. married me after, but the land was already mine. Every contract Charles III signed was void. The crowd had pressed closer, torchlight making everyone's face look like harvest moon orange. Emma could smell their anger, sweat, and tobacco, and that particular scent of people ready for violence. String them up, someone shouted from the back. Murderers, another voice. They killed Charles Sr. Patterson raised one huge hand. There'll be law here, proper law. Charles and Margaret Reardon, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Charles tried to run. He made it 3 steps before his legs folded. The shoulder wound had been bleeding steady through the makeshift bandage, leaving a trail dark as molasses on the boardwalk. He went down hard, face hitting the wood with a sound like dropping a melon. Charles, Margaret dropped beside him, her composure finally cracking like ice in spring. She pressed her hands against his wound, but the blood kept coming, seeping between her fingers. Their town, DeMorrison pushed through the crowd, medical bag in hand. He knelt beside Charles, fingers checking his pulse at the neck. His face told Emma everything Charles wouldn't see morning. He needs surgery, the doctor said. Now, or he's dead within the hour. The jail has a table, Marshal Morrison said. We can... No. Margaret's voice came out raw. You're not taking him. She pulled something from her sleeve, a tiny derringer, 2-shot, pearl-handled, the same kind of little gun fancy ladies carried in cities. She pointed it at Dr. Morrison's head. Fix him, she said. Here, now. I can't operate in the street. Margaret cocked the derringer. The click sounded loud as breaking kindling in the sudden quiet. "Try." Patterson's hand went to his sidearm, but Margaret swung the little gun toward Victoria. "Nobody moves or she dies." Emma's torn hands clenched into fists. After everything, the bog, the chase, all of it, they were back to guns and threats. "Margaret!" Charles' voice came out wet, bubbling. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth. "Stop! Shut up!" Margaret didn't look at him. Kept the derringer trained on Victoria. "You're going to live. We're going to California. We're going to start over." "With what money?" Patterson asked. "The accounts are frozen. Northern Pacific is under federal investigation. You have nothing. We have her." Margaret jerked the gun toward Victoria. "She'll sign papers, transfer the land, give us what we're owed." "Owed." Victoria's laugh came bitter as chicory coffee. "You murdered my husband, both of them." Margaret's face went still. "Both. I was married to Charles Jr. first. You're Charles III, he's nobody. Just a step to Charles Sr. took in out of pity." The derringer shook in Margaret's hand. "You're lying." "Check the courthouse records," Victoria said. "It's all there. Your husband, the man bleeding out at your feet, he never had any claim to anything." Charles made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been dying. More blood came up, darker now, almost black in the torchlight. "All for nothing," he whispered. "Papa knew. That's why he kept her close. She was the real heir all along." Margaret looked down at him then, and in her face Emma saw something break, not like ice or glass, but like something inside just stopped working. The derringer dropped from her fingers, clattered on the boardwalk. Patterson's deputies moved in fast, pulled Margaret's hands behind her back, iron shackles clicking closed. She didn't resist, just stared at Charles as his breathing got shallower, wetter. DeMorrison worked fast, trying to stop the bleeding, but Emma could see it was too late. The carbolic acid Margaret had poured on the wound had done too much damage, burned too deep. The infection had spread, turned the blood dark and poisonous. "Victoria?" Charles whispered. His eyes found hers, focused with effort. "The basement, at the house. Father's safe." "We know about the safe," Patterson said. "We'll recover—" "No." Charles coughed, spraying blood across the boardwalk. "Different safe. Behind the wine racks. Father's real records. The railroad. Bigger than you know." His breathing rattled like dried beans in a jar. Once, twice, then stopped. Dr. Morrison sat back on his heels, shaking his head. "He's gone." Margaret made no sound. She stood between the deputies, staring at Charles' body like she was trying to memorize every detail. Then she looked at Victoria, and her eyes were empty as abandoned wells. "You won," Margaret said. "Are you happy?" "No," Victoria said quietly. "Nobody wins when family destroys itself." Patterson gestured to his deputies. "Take her to jail. We'll transport her to Topeka tomorrow for federal trial." As they led Margaret away, she stopped, turned back to look at Emma. "You should have taken the money, girl. In the end, money's all that matters." "No," Emma said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "In the end, doing right is all that matters." Margaret laughed, a sound like something breaking inside. "Tell yourself that when you're old and poor and forgotten." They took her away then, her muddy dress dragging behind her like a ruined wedding train. The crowd parted to let them pass, then slowly began to disperse. The show was over. Charles was dead. Margaret would hang justice, or something close to it. Victoria stood looking at Charles's body, covered now with someone's coat. He was just a baby when Charles Sr. married his mother. I helped raise him, taught him to read, and he grew up to murder the only father he knew. "Greed does things to people," Patterson said. changes them into something they maybe weren't meant to be, or shows who they really were all along, Victoria said. Emma helped Victoria walk to Hutchins' office. The auction house was too damaged to stay in. They sat in the back room while Patterson's men collected evidence, took statements, sorted through the mess of the night. "The house," Victoria said suddenly. "Charles said there was another safe." "We'll check tomorrow," Patterson said. "Get some rest." But Emma saw something in Victoria's eyes. Urgency. Fear, maybe. "What is it? Charles Sr. told me once that he'd hidden something. Insurance, he called it, in case the railroad ever came after him directly." Victoria stood, swaying slightly. "We need to go now. Tonight." "Why?" Patterson asked. "Because Charles knew about it, which means Margaret knew. And if she told anyone else?" Patterson's eyes went wide. "They'll burn it! Destroy the evidence!" They rode through the darkness one more time, Patterson, his deputies, Marshal Morrison, Emma, and Victoria. The Reardon house stood dark against the sky, windows black as empty eye sockets. They were too late. The front door stood open, swinging in the night breeze. Inside, furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, papers scattered like snow. Someone had been here. Recently, Emma could smell tobacco smoke, still fresh. They found the wine cellar, the racks pulled away from the wall. Behind them, a hole in the stone where a safe had been. Empty. "Gone," Patterson said. "They got here first." Victoria walked to the hole, ran her fingers along the edges. Then she smiled, the first real smile Emma had seen from her. "No," Victoria said. "Charles Sr. was smarter than that." She pressed something in the stone, a catch hidden in the mortar. A section of wall swung open, revealing another safe. The real one. Inside were ledgers, contracts, and something else, photographs. Men Emma recognized from newspaper drawings, railroad executives, federal judges, even a senator from Washington, all of them at a hunting lodge, holding drinks, smiling for the camera. And in the middle of them, Dr. Morrison from Cedar Falls, holding up a ledger like a trophy. Patterson whistled low. "This is it. This is what we needed." But Emma was looking at one photograph in particular. A man in the background, half hidden but familiar. It was their Dr. Morrison, their town doctor, the one everyone trusted. He was there too. Emma's finger shook as she pointed at the photograph. "That's our Dr. Morrison, behind the senator." Patterson took the photograph, held it close to the lantern light. The town doctor stood half in shadow, but his face was clear enough, the same gentle face that had delivered babies, set broken bones, sat with dying folks through their last hours. "When was this taken?" Patterson asked Victoria. Victoria studied the image, her muddy fingers leaving prints on the edges. 2 years ago, Charles Sr. went to that hunting lodge. Came back troubled. Said he'd seen things that made him sick. Your doctor's been reporting to them, Patterson said. Every death certificate he signed, every time someone got suspicious, he was their eyes in Abilene. Emma felt her knees go weak. Dr. Morrison had tended Papa in his last days, had held Emma's hand when Papa passed. Had he been reporting then, too, watching for property worth taking, Marshal Morrison, no relation to the doctor cursed under his breath, he's probably at his house. We need to... Gone. Deputy Jenkins stood in the doorway, breathing hard from running. His house is empty. Neighbors saw him leave an hour ago, took his medical bag and rode east, toward Cedar Falls, Patterson said. He's running to his handlers. Victoria pulled more documents from the safe, deeds, contracts, bank drafts. Each page revealed another thread in the web. The railroad had bought judges, sheriffs, doctors, anyone who might stand in their way. 17 murders, Patterson said, reading from a ledger. Maybe more, all to push the railroad through. Emma thought of those 17 families, widows like Victoria, children orphaned, lives destroyed for profit. Her stomach turned sour as old milk. "This ends now," Patterson said. He turned to his deputies. "Wire every town between here and Cedar Falls. Dr. Morrison is wanted for conspiracy to commit murder, armed and dangerous." They worked through the night, cataloging evidence. Emma's torn hands ached as she helped sort papers, but she didn't stop. Each document was another nail in the railroad's coffin. Dawn came gray and cold. Emma stood on the porch, watching the sun paint the prairie gold. Victoria joined her, wrapped in a blanket someone had found. "It's over," Victoria said. "Is it?" Emma looked toward town. DeMorrison's still out there, the railroad executives, the judges they bought. Patterson will get them. Victoria's voice held certainty Emma didn't feel. "The evidence is too clear." They returned to town to find the streets packed. Word had spread overnight the doctor was a murderer. The railroad was corrupt. 17 people had been killed. Folks stood in clusters, talking low and angry. Margaret sat in the jail cell, still in her ruined dress. She looked up when they entered but said nothing. Her face had gone blank as fresh paper. "The trial's set for next week, Kurt," Patterson told them. "Federal court in Topeka. You'll both need to testify." Emma nodded. Her hands had been bandaged by one of Patterson's men, a field medic who knew his business. The white gauze made her feel like she was wearing mittens. "What about the doctor?" Victoria asked. "We'll find him. Men like that always make mistakes when they run." But 3 days passed with no word. DeMorrison had vanished like smoke. The federal marshals found his horse abandoned near the county line, but the trail went cold after that. The funeral for Charles was held on a Tuesday. Only a handful came. Marshal Morrison out of duty, the Reverend out of obligation. Margaret watched from her cell window. Victoria paid for the coffin, had them bury him beside Charles Sr. "Why?" Emma asked as they stood by the fresh grave. "He was family once," Victoria said, "before the greed took him." The day before the trial, Patterson came with news. "Dr. Morrison's dead. Found him in a hotel room in Kansas City. Poisoned himself rather than face justice." Emma felt nothing, no satisfaction, no sadness, just empty, like a bucket with the bottom kicked out. They took the train to Topeka, Emma's first time on one. The seats were red velvet, soft as clouds. Victoria sat beside her, holding the evidence box on her lap like it might fly away. The federal courthouse was bigger than anything in Abilene, 3 stories of limestone and marble, with pillars thick as trees. Inside, the courtroom could hold 200 people. It was full. Emma testified first. She told about finding Victoria in the bog, about Charles and Margaret's threats, about the attempted drowning. Her voice stayed steady even when the prosecutor showed photographs of the bog, of Charles's body. Victoria testified next, 3 hours on the stand, describing 3 years of fear, of sleeping with a locked door, of testing every meal for poison. When she talked about Charles Sr.'s last night, tears ran down her face, but her voice never wavered. Margaret's lawyer, a thin man from Kansas City, tried to paint Victoria as delusional, Emma as a gold digger. But the evidence was too strong. The ledgers, the photographs, the forged documents. And then Patterson's surprise witness, a railroad clerk who'd kept copies of every bribe, every payment, insurance against his employers. The jury deliberated for 1 hour. Guilty. Murder in the first degree, conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement. Margaret stood for sentencing, still wearing that muddy dress she'd refused any other clothes. When the judge read the sentence, death by hanging, She laughed. Just once. Sharp as breaking glass. Your Honor, she said. Might I make a request? The judge nodded. Hang me on November 15th. It would have been Charles's birthday. They granted her request. Emma and Victoria took the train home in silence. The prairie rolled past the windows, endless and gold in the autumn light. When they reached Abilene, half the town was waiting at the station. Mrs. Reardon, someone called. What will you do now? Victoria looked at Emma, then at the crowd. Rebuild. The auction house first, then we'll see. November 15th came cold and gray. Emma didn't go to the hanging, neither did Victoria. They heard the church bells ring at noon longer than usual, the way they did for executions. Then silence. Patterson came by that afternoon with final papers. The railroad executives have been arrested, 15 men total. The senator resigned. It's really over. After he left, Victoria and Emma sat in the office Hutchins had loaned them while the auction house was rebuilt. Outside, sleet tapped against the windows like fingernails. I have something for you, Victoria said. She pulled out a document, legal papers, witnessed and sealed, partnership papers, Hartley and Reardon Auction House, equal partners. I can't accept this, Emma said. It's too much. It's not enough. Yet Victoria's hand covered Emma's bandaged ones. You saved my life. Twice. You lost your job, nearly died yourself. Let me do this one thing right. Emma looked at the papers, then at Victoria. Two women from different worlds, brought together by violence, but bonded by something stronger. Partners, Emma said. They rebuilt through the winter. The auction house rose from limestone and good timber, bigger than before, with proper windows and a tin roof that wouldn't leak. Emma learned to write again with her scarred hands, the pen feeling strange but manageable. Spring came early that year. The auction house opened in March with a livestock sale that brought buyers from 3 counties. Emma ran the auction while Victoria kept the books. They made a good team. By summer, they'd built houses side by side on the east end of town. Nothing fancy. Just simple frame houses with good foundations and proper wells. Emma planted a garden. Victoria raised chickens. Normal life, the kind they'd both thought was lost. The railroad never recovered from the scandal. Northern Pacific pulled out of Kansas entirely. The land they'd tried to steal stayed with the families who'd worked it. One evening, late in summer, they sat on Victoria's porch watching the sunset over the prairie. The air smelled of grass and approaching rain. Peaceful. Do you ever think about them? Emma asked. Charles and Margaret, every day. Victoria sipped her tea. I think about who they might have been if greed hadn't poisoned them. Would you change what happened? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. No, it had to end. The killing, the stealing, it had to stop. Emma nodded. Her hands still ached when the weather changed. Probably always would. But they worked fine. That was what mattered. My father used to say we're all just folks. Emma said, rich or poor. We all bleed the same color. Smart man, he was. They sat until the stars came out. 2 women who'd survived what should have killed them. Tomorrow there'd be another auction. More work, more life. But tonight, they sat in the prairie darkness, breathing free air, no longer afraid. The bog where it all started had been filled in by the county order. No more accidents, no more secrets hiding in marsh water. Just solid ground where danger used to be. Sometimes Emma passed by that spot on her way to neighboring towns for estate sales. The grass had grown over it thick and green. You'd never know what had happened there unless you knew to look, and that was fine. Some things were better buried, but the partnership Emma and Victoria built that lived on, through good years and bad, through droughts and prosperity. They ran that auction house together. 2 women the world said shouldn't be equals, Proving the world wrong one sale at a time, Emma never married. Neither did Victoria. They didn't need to. They had their work, their friendship, their hard-won peace. That was enough. More than enough. When Emma was old and her hands too arthritic to hold a gavel, she'd sometimes tell the story to young folks who'd listen. How kindness could defeat greed. How courage didn't always look like you'd expect. How sometimes the good Lord put you exactly where you needed to be, even if it was beside a bog with a dying woman and nothing but your father's coat to save her with. Most didn't believe her. The story was too wild, too much like something from a dime novel. But sometimes someone would listen close and nod, would understand that the truest stories were often the hardest to believe. And Emma would smile, remembering that September day when she was young and thought 50 cents a day made her rich, before she learned what real wealth was not money, but doing right when it mattered most. The auction house still stands in Abilene, though it's been sold and resold many times. But if you know where to look, you can still see the cornerstone Emma and Victoria laid together. Hartley and Reardon, 883, built on trust. That's all that really needs to be said. Looking back across 40 years, I still remember that September evening in 1883 when Emma Hartley taught me something I'll carry to my grave. I was there. You see one of those townspeople with torches, ready to string up Margaret and Charles without trial, ready to become the very evil we claimed to fight. But watching Emma refuse that $1,000, watching her risk everything for a stranger in the mud, well, that changed something in me. She could have walked away rich. Instead, she walked away right. That choice rippled through our community like a stone in still water, reminding us that decency doesn't check your bank balance first. Emma and Victoria prove that when society tells you people are too different to be equals, sometimes society is dead wrong. This story, inspired by true events from the Kansas frontier of the 880s, was created solely for entertainment purposes. It does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination, and any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The story serves to explore themes of justice, redemption, and human dignity within a historical fiction framework.